Hey guys, welcome back to Unit 7. This unit we're going to go into actually one of my favorite social institutions to study and organizations, therefore, to deal with, which is the social institution of the mass media, and the organization are going to be mass media corporations. I absolutely love this. It's thoroughly depressing, but it's fascinating to me mainly because of the main reading that you are going to do for this week. It's going to be a couple of selections from a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's a book that was written by a media professor in the 1980s named Neil Postman. And what he has to say, or what he had to say, during the Reagan administration about 30 years ago, just a little bit more than 30 years ago, just has so much relevance to what we are going through right now. I'm not going to spoil it a ton, but it's, first of all, it's very, very readable, but it is just insight after insight after insight. It's fantastic. But for video one, what we're going to deal with is just the social institution of the mass media in a general way. And so I've got, I think, 4 big points. I'm going to talk to you about generally what mass media exists to do. That'll be the first point. Second point will be, I'm just scrolling through my script, the 2 functions the mass media has for the population. Third point is going to be the statuses and norms in a very, very general way that make up the mass media. And then the fourth point is going to be just sort of a not exactly a history lesson, but just kind of emphasizing where it started and the fact that it's a relatively new social institution, at least compared to like the economy and child rearing. Okay, so point number 1, social institution of the mass media exists to communicate culture. In other words, this side of our machine, in our stupid drawings back with the person getting inserted into a machine, this side of the machine, you probably remember, is culture. It's got the symbolic universe, which explains reality to us, and the collective consciousness, which tells us how we should live our lives. So let's pause right there. The mass media is a social institution that its job, the whole point of it, is to communicate this stuff. And if you think about it, that's basically, the mass media is a medium of communication in which stories are told to us, just all kinds of stories. Now, the way I'm describing it makes it seem relatively banal and maybe even beneficial, and your experience with the mass media is almost certainly that it's kind of entertaining but horrible. I mean, the degree of objectification, the amount of violence, all of that stuff. I'll get to all that and why we have that. But in its most general way, not our specific mass media, but any mass media, it is a medium of communication to the masses. So what is it communicating? It is communicating our culture, symbolic universe, and collective consciousness. That's point 1. Point 2, so what are the functions that it plays? This person, remember, isn't just an isolated individual. This stick figure is supposed to represent the whole bunch of people in a population who all step in at the same time, go through this machine, and come out with patterns of thoughts and behavior. So what is the function? Why does a population of people set up this social institution of mass media? We've got 2 functions that it is going to have. The first function is that it creates social cohesion. Now take this little person, and remember, we evolved in groups of about 100, but about 10,000 years ago, blew that up into tens of thousands, and in our case, hundreds of millions of people. That's a lot of people to keep on the same page, to get them thinking, we're all a group, and we're all pointed in that particular direction with our lives. How could that possibly happen? It can't be that every little stick figure goes around and communicates with every other stick figure. So we've got to find some way of communicating the same culture so that you understand reality the same way I understand reality, and that you are oriented toward living your life in a similar way to the way I am. The example that I've used over and over again is we don't stone girls to death for going to school because we define women and girls as people who are appropriately placed in schools, and our collective consciousness says that girls and women should be pursuing their education, and we should not visit violence on them for doing something like that. But if you and I don't, and remember, it's not inevitable that your brain and my brain both contain all of those similar ideas. You and I have never met, and yet our brains contain all these similar ideas. It's not an accident that that's happened. It's because we've all been inserted into the same machine, with the same culture, and the way we've done that is because you and I have taken part in the same mass media. Our parents took part in the same mass media. And so all of these very, very similar stories that get told over and over and over again reinforce each other and produce this culture for all of us to step into. All right, in sum, the mass media exists in part to create social cohesion. We see the world the same way, and so we're connected. The second thing that it does is, and this will make sense in the context of creating social cohesion, you've got babies being born every day who need to also learn the same stuff. Now, most of them are going to learn this, at least at first, from their parents, but, I mean, let's be honest. I was put in front of a TV when I was 2 years old. I was taught to read by Sesame Street. Most of us spent more time than probably our parents would be proud to say in front of a TV or listening to the radio or watching movies, all of that. In other words, one of the functions of the mass media is also to socialize children, to teach them how to be a proper member of a society. That's not none of us is probably proud of that, but that's one of the functions that the mass media has. Okay, so that was point 2. Point 1, what does it do? It communicates culture. Point 2, what are the functions of it? What role is it supposed to play for the population? It's supposed to create social cohesion, and it's supposed to socialize kids. All right, I gotta pull my script down. Point 3, what are the main statuses and norms? Now, this is going to be an even more egregious oversimplification than when I dealt with capitalism in a general way. So, don't be overly upset. Realize that if we're talking about the mass media, we're talking about everybody from the owners of media corporations through to the business side of management of it, through to the writers and actors and directors and camera people and sound people and special effects people. You can see there's no way I can reasonably articulate all of those different statuses. So we're going to oversimplify to 3. Sorry. The 3 we're going to deal with are going to be, and I want this to also kind of parallel what we've dealt with in the past in terms of the statuses. We've got mass media owners, and their norm is to buy equipment and buy workers. In other words, hire the people who are going to be actually producing the content. Second, and actually, as I'm doing this, I'm kind of going to wing this, and we're gonna make this into 4 statuses. The second status is going to be the managers, who are going to be the people who are going to organize production for the profit of the owners. So we've got the owners who actually put up the money to buy the recording equipment, hire the actors, all of that stuff. We've got the managers who are in charge of not creating the content, but who are in charge of making sure that things happen on time. they're making the decisions about what is going to get produced or what content they are going to buy from a different producer. Third, we have got content creators. And these people, and you can tell if you remember the different levels of statuses that we had when we dealt with capitalism in the first place. We had owners, managers, workers. Here we've got content creators. They're the workers. But this is going to encompass all kinds of people. This is the writers, the directors, the actors, the camera people, special effects people, all of that. And their job is to, unsurprisingly, to actually create the content. I probably didn't need to write that. Fourth and final status, within the social institution. Now remember, we're not just in a corporation right now, so within the social institution is you and me. Content consumers. I hope that's legible. Content consumers. It's very close to being legible. That's you and me. That's me watching a movie. That's you listening to a song. That's, if anybody reads anymore, that's us reading, because that's also mass media content as well. Okay, so there we go. 4 statuses: owner, manager, content creators, and content consumers. And yes, I know that's a huge oversimplification, but it gets us close enough to where we need to go to understand the effects of all of this stuff for us living in an organizational world. All right, fourth point is the social institution, just a very, very brief historical overview. And really it all basically has one big point, which is it starts with Gutenberg inventing the movable type printing press in 1455. The reason that's the only date, and I'm not going to ask you that on a test, it's just important for context. So we evolve into being 150,000 years ago. We have the cognitive revolution like between 70,000 and maybe 35,000 years ago. We've only had mass media for our species for a little over 500 years, which is, obviously it's a long time by your or my lifetime, but in terms of our species, not very much time. Before that, almost all, writing had been invented, but almost all communication that any normal person would have in their life would be face-to-face. It might be that you told a story to somebody and then they went and told it to somebody else, and so ultimately you might have been the content creator and it got filtered that way. But it was all face-to-face. Now I want you to think about that in the context of how many interactions you have with people that are not face-to-face. And I'm not talking about texting somebody on your phone. I'm talking about in preparation for this section, for this unit of the class, I watched a movie that I'm pretty sure I'm not totally sure, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have you guys watch. And the movie was produced by dozens of people. Now, we don't think of it this way, but this is dozens of people creating stories and telling me to them, or telling them to me, and me not having any chance to question them about it, to ask them what they meant by it. It is me receiving it as though it's happening in nature, right? I'm seeing it on a screen. It's like looking out a window and this is just what's happening. Except it's not just what's happening. It's what a dozen or so or several dozen people selected and sculpted and shaped for me to see and presented as sort of a normal, inevitable story. That's important because, my God, that is the main way that we get communication nowadays. Most people in America communicate with the mass media, just in terms of watching it, for over 40 hours a week. I mean, that's a full-time job of hearing stories and seeing stories from people that you're never going to meet. That is a radical, radical change for our species. And it's going to have some consequences for how we end up living our lives. Okay. Boom, that's the end of it. Brief, just a summary now. The mass media, the social institution of the mass media, exists to communicate culture in order to keep us all on the same page. That's social cohesion and socialize kids. But that's probably not what it feels like because, and this is where we're going to go in the next video, our mass media is for profit. That's not bad, but it's got consequences. So next time, in the next video, what we're going to see is, so what happens if you take this social institution that is, its job is to communicate culture and say the people who are going to be in charge of that, their number one task as a corporation is to make money. How does that change the way this social institution plays out? I'll talk to you in that video.